the big thing, it's pronounced sauna.
The more you sauna, the better you'll be.
It's hard to live without one.
Yeah, you can't not have a sauna.
It's been an important part of our life always.
It's so warm in here, I like there.
Probably one of the sweetest sounds to hear that slap of the sauna door and then this run, stamp, 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 splash into the lake and then maybe a shriek.
My neighborhood, they always come over because I'm the only one on my road that has a sauna, so a lot of times someone else heats it, I don't even have to do it.
It is a time when we can, just get together and you just sit and throw steam and chat.
When you go in the sauna with somebody, you're naked. You don't have nothing up your sleeve. You talk, and that's all you have is the two of you and you're equals in the sauna.
I wish I was still able to go into the family sauna, but I cannot. So I'm still grieving. I helped Dad build it, and it's a loss.
It was just a coming together of the family. We just knew every Saturday night we were all together, all the aunts and uncles and cousins.
I was born in a sauna, and I've enjoyed it ever since.
We've got a very special session lined up today. It's all about stories and sauna in a place that's near and dear to our hearts, Michigan's Copper Country, or Kuparisaari, as the Finnish name of it. This part of the country is rich in Finnish and Finnish-American heritage and history, and we can see that clearly in the local sauna culture. And we've got the right people here to tell you all about it today. And I'm more than thrilled to introduce you to today's moderator, Jim Kurtti. Jim was born and raised in the heartland of Finnish America in the village of Bruce Crossing, the grandson of Finnish immigrants. He attended Suomi College, later Finlandia University in Hancock, Michigan. He served as the director of the Finnish-American Heritage Center and editor of the Finnish-American Reporter, and he currently sits as the Honorary Consul of Finland in the Upper Peninsula. He's got an extensive CV, so please check that out on our website. And he's joined by Haley Goodrow and Amanda and Daena Mäkelä and Barbara Männinen today. So we're so glad to have you all here. Jim, I'll kick it over you to get the conversation started.
Thank you for having us all. And I've been watching the chat, and I see quite a few familiar names, even names of people whose saunas I have visited. So it's, I guess we're among friends. But yes, I have been, somehow I've been thrust into being some sort of sauna ambassador. I think it's mainly because of the building behind me. It's become a destination place for many people. This is sauna number 2. Sauna number 3, Daena is going to tell the story of someday as well. But with me, we have Barbara Männinen, who is also from the town I presently live in, which is Painesdale. She grew up here in the heart of mining country and on the streets where Finns were allowed to live and had sauna. And we also have Haley Goodrow, who is shall we say, she's a convert to Finnish America and to sauna culture. She has moved to the area, married a man with Finnish heritage, and has fallen in love with sauna and sauna culture to the point where she has begun a project of sort of a coffee table book on regional saunas. And then we have Daena and Amanda Mäkelä, and Daena, again, is a Finnish American who grew up just a very short distance from here. He used to be an IT tech to my house when he and my son were in high school, but he has now married Amanda, and Amanda is also a convert to Finnish American identity, embracing the Finnish American culture here, in particular through also sauna. And so we have all different perspectives, but they all conclude that sauna is a pretty cool place. So I was asked to say something about the history of the area and the connection to sauna. So Finns began coming here in 1865 at the end of the Civil War, when copper was discovered here and America had a shortage of labor. So Finns were recruited first from northern Norway and then from northern Sweden and then from Finland itself. And almost immediately they started to erect saunas. They couldn't be without them, especially here. Behind me, the picture was taken probably very early winter. We're getting close to 250 inches of snow, and it's been quite wintry and cold lately. So sauna is one way that all of us survive in the UP. After a short time, the Finns began to also have public saunas, and in many cases, those public saunas were the type that Barbara's going to explain, sort of a mom and pop on the side sort of thing. And then others were large public saunas where a lot of the single miners would go and people would go to bathe. And the last of them, I think, closed in the 1990s here in this area. I was thinking about the fact that we're all inspired by Sauna Stories, and I'd like to tell one. I'm Finnish on my father's side. My mother was what they called a toiskielinen, one who speaks another language, and her mother was Irish extraction. Went through 8th grade and then went to teachers college, which in those days was a couple of weeks. And at 16 years old, she became a teacher and when you're a newbie, of course, you don't get the best gigs. So she was sent to rural Mass City and an area known to be very predominantly Finnish, if not 100%. She was given an assignment in a one-room school that was really a converted chicken coop. And she lived in the farmhouse of the owners of the chicken coop. And she went to an area in the United States where there wasn't a single adult that spoke English, and only some of the children who had had some years of school spoke English. And so she was in this very remote place in the United States where she couldn't use English other than to teach children. She never talked about sauna issues, but a lot of young women who were in the same situation, they were sent into the countryside where the Finns were, and they came up against the sauna tradition. And one of the most striking things was, in the old days, when it was still the smoke sauna, savu sauna, there very often wasn't a changing room. You undressed outside, hung your clothes there, and took a sauna. And when you were through, you often just draped your clothes over your arm and walked back into the house. So you can imagine a 16-year-old girl and coming off of what was sort of the Victorian age, and suddenly your landlord and landlady are walking in with their clothes on their arm and thinking nothing of it. So this was one way that sauna butted up against the more predominant culture of the United States. Another example, this region became very well known as a place where, especially men from Lower Michigan, from Detroit area, but from the cities, would come to hunt. We had a great population of white-tailed deer, and they would come up and hunt in the region, and they would be tromping through the fields and forest, and especially on a Saturday night, they would suddenly come across a farm, and one of the buildings would have smoke coming out of every crack and crevice, coming out the doors and windows and everywhere else. And they would run to the farmhouse and pound on the door and say, your building's on fire. And of course, it was the savu sauna being heated. And as you know about savu sauna, the fire is contained inside with no chimney, and it leaks out wherever it can. And so these were places where sauna was first introduced to the broader American population with mixed results, I'm sure. But certainly funny stories about how sauna had been part of this Finnish-American culture. I was told once a few years ago that except for the old order Amish, the Finnish-Americans are the most rural people in the United States. And that certainly was true here. As soon as they could get land, they were off into remote spots like Tapiola and Toivola and Aura and Nisula. And so they had the sauna culture there that still lives today. But other times it was here in the mining towns. And quite interesting, the mine bosses, who were quite paternalistic, allowed the Finns to build saunas on leased land. You know, the houses were rented to the miners, and you lived in that house only as long as there was a miner in the mine. Sometimes even the day of the funeral, the family had to get out because his replacement was coming in. But despite all of that, they allowed saunas, I suppose because they wanted the population to be clean. But Barbara had some very nice stories about her family in saunas, and maybe you'd like to share them now, Barbara?
Okay, yes, I'm second generation Finnish-American, and my whole life was lived in the copper country. I was raised in basically Painesdale, Michigan, and you mentioned Painesdale, copper mining town. And on the other side of the tracks, there was kind of a dividing line in Painesdale. The miners, the ordinary miners lived north of maybe Forest Street. And then the English and the Cornish and those that were of a better ilk were on the other side, Highland Street and beyond. And maybe those houses had bathing facilities indoors. But where we lived, those houses were built without any bathing facilities indoors. And there was outhouses. And the miners lived there, and they could go and take a bath because they were the Copper Range was paternalistic too. In the Sarah Sargent Payne Memorial Library, they provided bathing facilities in the basement. There were like 3 big bathtubs for the families. They could sign up and go and take a bath, women on one day and men on another. And it was heated from the mine, exhaust from the mine came up to heat it. But the Finns like to take a sauna. And like you mentioned, they were allowed to build saunas. And so when I grew up in Painesdale, we didn't have an indoor bathing facility. And we always went to a sauna. At first, it was to Harju or the Huttunen sauna, which was a smoke sauna. And I didn't go there. I was a little girl. And by the time we lived to go there, the sauna was on its downhill. And there was a lady was getting too old. There was Tuominen sauna on Adams Street, the same street, in the garage. And then there was, I'm trying to think, Nick Kangus's place, on Highland Street. And then there was Kivinimi's on Concord Street, but that came in later also. My dad built a sauna on Adams Street before our house burned. So we took saunas there. But then when the house burned in 1952, we had to move to another house on Douglas Street. And he built a sauna in the backyard there. And that was the one that a lot of people came to in the neighborhood, Finnish people. My oldest son was telling me last night that he remembers, because he was born in 1963, he remembers being in that kitchen in the house on Douglas Street and hearing these old people come, and lots of Finnish was being spoken. And I remember growing up having to do some chores. In the wintertime, Painesdale has a lot of snow. Shoveling on Wednesday for Wednesday night sauna, and then for Saturday sauna, having to shovel the path, go in the sauna, scrape out the ashes from the stove, get it ready so that my mother could go in and get the sauna stove started. And then we also, us girls, had to bake. She liked to have cookies and cake, and she made the nisu, but she liked to have bakery for the saunavieraita, who came. And they all sat in the kitchen waiting their turn. And those are my memories of that sauna growing up. I remember in high school in home ec, the teacher was young. She was just a graduate of Michigan State University, very pretty young woman, married to a tech student. And she was talking to us girls about hygiene and about taking showers every day. And I had to go after class and tell her, well, we don't have any indoor bathing facilities, that we take a sauna twice a week, Wednesday and Friday. And, we maintain our cleanliness. And so it was kind of like a little introduction to her, to our culture, where she came to teach. And I didn't get to take a shower really until in high school before swimming. We had a swimming pool. And it was where I got to take a shower. But otherwise, there was no shower in our public sauna. You just dumped water over yourself when you were through bathing. You took a bath in there. I mean, it was meant to take a bath. And my mother maintained the cleanliness of the sauna. You know, she scrubbed the benches and the carpeting, the Finnish rag rugs that were on the floor and on the benches in the changing room. I don't know, is there anything else you want to hear about the public sauna?
Well, of course, we want to hear all kinds of things. It reminds me of a story in the village of Tapiola nearby here. Again, probably 100% Finnish people, except for the school teachers who were sent, or the principal. So a principal was sent to the Doli school, and as a way of welcoming him, the local store owner, Mr. Järvenpää, invited him and his family over for dinner and sauna. And it was the first time that this Englishman and his family had sauna. And so in turn, the superintendent invited the Järvenpääs over so that they could experience a bathtub, because they had never taken a bath before. So again, it's sort of that time of transition time between the two cultures.
I read also that the miners themselves could take a shower in the dry.
Yes.
The mining company provided showers, so those men got to take a shower who used the dry, you know, when they came from underground or whatever, and change their clothes. I thought that was interesting.
And they would stand in a line, and they'd all turn in one direction, and the man would wash the back of the one in front of him, and then they turn and do it the other way as well.
Wow.
Because of course they were tired by the end of those long shifts. But we should also maybe hear from we have Daena, who's sort of the transition. He's a younger generation other than Barbara and me, and his wife Amanda, and also Haley. So Haley, you, as we mentioned, you moved here and you embraced all the aspects of being Finnish-American, but in particular sauna. You love sauna. So tell us about it and what you're doing about it.
Yeah. So my story with sauna mostly starts with my husband, meeting him and his family, and they, similar to Barbara was describing the Wednesdays and Saturdays thing, he lived next to his grandparents growing up, and they had a sauna, and so when that was going, they would go Wednesdays and Saturdays, and it's very, very much was like a family affair. And so that was my first experience of it in a traditional sense, seeing what it's like from the Finnish-American influence. And so then after the sauna, you would have treats together and you'd be drinking coffee. And so I would say that that's probably my main introduction to this world. But I also used to work at Finlandia University. And so I was exposed to a lot of the Finnish-American heritage through that experience. My background, I like to do photos and photography, and I wasn't seeing a lot of, well, I was experiencing these different saunas, and they're all so cool and unique in their own way. I mean, I know Amanda and Daena can definitely relate to me on this, and I wasn't seeing a lot when it as far as documenting those go, from a photography standpoint. And I was like, man, this is so cool. Every single one I've been in is so different. They all have their own characteristics within the changing room of things that have been there for years, like old shampoo bottles and conditioners, but also these really cool pieces of artwork that have been collected over time hanging up. And so my project kind of started from like a documentation standpoint, but it's interesting because Amanda, Daena, and I kind of started this adventure at the same time. And so both of our first like interviews were at the same time. And feel free to butt in if you guys want to, because I know we have a lot of similar and a lot of overlap, because Amanda and I both were introduced in the into the Finnish-American culture through our partners. So, but yeah, I'm hoping with the book that I'm working on, it'll be primarily photos in the book, but it will have around 10 to 12 stories, like scattered throughout and varying topics. So things related to nudity and sauna culture and what that looks like in the Upper Peninsula, and how it can be kind of situational depending on the context that you're in. Also newcomers to sauna culture. And so that's kind of more like my experience and being brought into sauna culture from that standpoint. So that will be a lot of what's in the book, but I've been really enjoying documenting all the different saunas that I've seen. So far, I would say the most unique one that I've seen, and I wonder if he's in here. Oscar Bay, there's one that was a converted Coleman trailer that was converted into a sauna. And there's just a lot of unique saunas in the Upper Peninsula, and I've just been really enjoying documenting them. Almost every single one of them could have their own story, full length, written about it. And so that's something that I've found in talking to these individuals and taking photos of their saunas, is that they're all so unique. But yeah, that's kind of mainly what I've been working on. Some of the through lines I'm hoping to capture with the book include the historical element of how we've gotten here from the immigrants coming here and leaving this like amazing stamp of tradition on the area, but also just the community aspect and the wellness aspect, because there is a very tangible thing, especially in Hancock, and in Houghton, like in the Keweenaw Peninsula, the sauna, the belt of the buckle, you could say. It's so tangible here, and you can feel that aspect of cultural like heritage. We have our own winter festival, Heikenpäivä, and we have all of these street signs that are in Finnish. It's very, you can feel it in this area. And so those are some things that I'm really hoping to capture in the book. But it's been a really fun journey. It's not something that I thought I would go down, but I'm really happy that I'm here. So I'm just also the sauna behind me. Oop. Can you hear me, guys? Oh, okay. Also, the sauna behind me is actually Jim Kurtti's sauna that I photographed on the tour, and that is also behind Jim. I was wondering which one I wanted to choose, but I felt like this was fitting. So if you want to see some more of the pictures that I've taken, logbook stories, we're on social media, and we also have a website, so you can check out some of the work there. But that's
also
about it.
Haley, we need to recognize that last year in celebration of Sauna Week, we had sauna tours, similar to house tours that they do at Christmas. Had no idea how it would go over, but it went over very well. And Haley took it over this year, and she arranged the tours, and so that was another aspect. Haley, can you actually mention one of your favorite sauna stories? Do you have a favorite anecdote?
Oh man, I think Nutsula sauna is probably on the top of my list. Part of the sauna tour last year. One of the people at the very end of the tour that I was on, I mean, you could go in either direction, but I ended going all the way out to more towards Breakers Beach, if any of you are familiar with the Keweenaw Peninsula. And yeah, he was born in the sauna that we were photographing. And that is just such a rich story, and that was definitely by far, so far, my favorite changing room that I've seen, and interior, because it was a converted Savu sauna, and you can still see the char marks on the sides of the walls, and man, I don't know, that was probably one of the most memorable for me. And then of course, after looking at the interior and seeing the sauna, I also got to see the inside of their house, and we ate and some homemade donuts, and we got to drink some coffee together, and so that was very memorable. Yeah.
It was interesting because I think it reflects on this whole sauna culture, and the hospitality after it is important, the coffee and the sweets. And so Mrs. Nuttila made many batches of donuts, and she insisted that all 53 or so people who went on the sauna tour had to come into her house and have coffee and donuts, and see the family photos on the wall, etc. But very much a reflection of how it wasn't just the bathing part, but it was the social part after. But
right.
We can come back to some of your favorite stories, Haley, and yours, Barbara, as well. But we should also talk to Amanda and Daena. And Daena is Finnish-American, and Amanda is adopted Finnish-American. We like to say here in the Copper Country that everyone who lives here is somewhat culturally Finnish-American. And I think the marvelous thing is that the Finnish community is very embracing of anyone who wants to be Finnish. So no problem there. Anyway, Daena and Amanda, you want to tell us about your projects?
Sure. I think, well, I guess I should introduce who we are a little bit. Yeah, so I'm half Finnish. My dad is full Finnish, and I guess I'm a third generation Finn through that. And I didn't live in the UP when I was first born until I was like 13. We moved up here. So that's the point. Other than when we would vacation up here, I would do saunas. My grandparents have a cottage on the lake. And so that was my first experience with sauna, and so that just
Daena, explain that the lake.
Lake Superior, the big lake. So yeah, they have it's a nice beach on called Misery Bay, which doesn't sound like a nice beach. And they had a little sauna in their basement, and so my dad would take us in there and until we got old enough to figure it out on our own, and then he would just go in and then sprint down the stairs, jump in the lake, rinse and repeat sort of thing. And then we moved up here, and the house we moved into had a sauna in the basement. And so then definitely during the winter, but basically whenever we could coerce my dad into firing it, we would be sauna. It would be like someday, a lot of times it would be sauna every day of the week, just as part of the bathing ritual. So not super long, not like multiple runs, not super long saunas, but definitely it became integrated into our life in that way. And so, and then as we started, Amanda and I moved away down to Austin, and we were looking for saunas everywhere, and we found a gym that had a sauna, and so we got exposed to like what a lot of people would say is improper sauna culture, but you were sort of desperate. You just had to take a sauna, and so
we'd be like the only ones naked or naked under a towel in the sauna, which definitely made us stand out.
But then you would sometimes then you would have these good conversations with people, and then so some of that cultural stuff does still live there. You just have to get through the layers of people wearing headphones, and you're like, if you just bring your own sauna mentality in, it sort of comes with you, I think. So we moved back here and then got back into the rhythm of saunas all the time. And then we built our own sauna, and so I have it fired up right now, and hopefully the fire has not gone out. But yeah, so that's our basic intro. I don't know.
Yeah. So professionally, when we moved up here, we Daena by trade is a professional video editor. So we to contextualize our work, we decided like how do we stay employed up here? So we created our own documentary film company. And so we integrated ourselves really professionally with a lot of businesses and small businesses, and we work primarily with Visit Keweenaw, which allows us to do a lot of like investigative video journalism, as you will, as a way to kind of like uplift the local stories, which in so many ways keyed us in a much more rich way to the culture that exists here in the Keweenaw. When you grow up in a place like Michigan or the Keweenaw, you very easily take these things for granted that are happening around you, the history, the culture. Even though Daena is a Finn, his family sort of did not kind of carry a lot of traditions with them. His grandma sort of wanted to be American, and so some of these like Finnish traditions did not get passed down to the kids, other than sauna just being like a fun, or like, a practice, a relaxation practice. Me growing up downstate, I sort of don't really have like a cultural identity per se. And so my family are landscapers, and so my dad built to the best he could a traditional Finnish sauna in our basement, but not as anything cultural, but it was just literally like a way to get warm and relax after a hard day of labor, right? So I grew up taking sauna after volleyball practice and had no context to what I was doing or the connections. But when Daena and I got together and we moved back up here, especially, we began to put all of these little connections back together and being able to talk to people kind of in these like very unrelated to sauna ways. We began to like see this cultural undercurrent, you know, kind of first maybe with his own grandfather who unfortunately passed away, but we were like, we need to capture these stories. You know, we have cameras and we have an ability to talk to people and a love to talk to people. We need to capture like his grandfather's story. And that's kind of where it sort of began of like, we just want his stories, nothing to do with sauna. But then that spawned into this thing, like Daena even still today takes a sauna every day. I mean, that's just like his practice of like mental relaxation. And so it's like, you know, him kind of like through this process, sussing out why is he so connected to it? What does it mean for him? What does it mean to be Finnish-American in the Keweenaw? You know, that's something that he's never explored and we've never explored. And when we had our daughter, it really kind of more drove it home, like, there's an identity here that we don't understand, that we are not connected to, but we want to be connected to. We're in some ways like adoptees both to a culture that is ours and not ours, in a place where we are not like natively from, I suppose you could say. I mean, no one is in a lot of ways, but you know, trying to find this identity. So all of these things came together at once, it felt like. And I think there was just like, for folks, you know, who work in certain industries, like that are very keyed into like what's happening on a day-to-day level within a community, like Haley and I both work in various types of social media and marketing. So we're always like listening and seeing what's going on. So you have these things where we're like noticing like little conversations, little people wishing for public sauna, and you know, kind of talking about how like our generation is wanting to be more connected to their communities, more connected to each other, at least here. And then as part of our work with Visit Keweenaw, we went to Jim's house to interview him about a local festival that he created called Heikinpäivä. And through that, you know, we just start talking about Daena's having this dream of like going around and just talking to people about their sauna tradition, because like he mentioned, you know, we're used to, I have my own unique take on it. We met so many people in Texas who have their own take on it. And even up here, there are tons of people like Finns, and like Haley said, not only is their space so personalized, but their practice is so personalized. And it's just like it's so different. And perhaps there would be some people like Eero who is like maybe a little bit like, oh, they're not doing it like this right way or whatever. But our perspective with it is like, we want to capture these stories before they disappear, before you know, yeah, I mean, that's truly just it. It's like before they disappear and before they become in the wash, because yes, there is this growing trend, right? And we've caught it, like we've caught the wave, like we were right on it. This interesting thing, everyone's so curious, everyone wants a sauna, it's fun. The culture up here is so embracing of it, because everyone sees the value in it, but also wants to participate in this fun new thing. But we also want to connect people, not just with the history, but with all these like fun, quirky stories that are the basis for what this culture is and means up here. And yeah, I mean, we've had so many opportunities to talk with even our friends and their parents and you know, people in the community. And Jim lit a fire under us to, you know, take this grand, oh yeah, I'm sorry, pun intended, I guess, but take this like grand idea and then to actualize it sooner rather than later with Sauna Stories during Sauna Week. So that was our participation the last 2 years. On one level was to solicit the community to come inside a sauna and talk to us about their stories. but that's also allowed us to connect on this grander scale of folks who we would have never known personally, to be like, okay, can we come to your space? Can we like come talk to you more?
In the sauna tours, I think it was a wonderful thing that happened was it initiated a lot of people to have these conversations. And one of the people who came to the tour said, you know, you allow so many people into your home, and that's your personal space. You allow even fewer into your sauna, which is even more personal. And it was noting that the way the sauna is set up, the way it's decorated, really is a reflection, a very personal reflection of who you are. And so it's wonderful that people are so open to offer that to other people. But let's go back to Barbara for a minute. Barbara, do you have some story in this regard?
Well, what I wanted to say is that being asked to participate in this program was a challenge for me. You know, it forced me to go back and think about my growing up years. I'm 81. And so I'm an 80s ladies now. And my mother died in 2003. So she's been gone for 23 years now. But I realized what an influence she was on the family. And so it really caused me to dig deeper now, to bring out all the books after she passed away that were left in her collection. And we were going through her things. I hauled those books home, bags full. And I pulled them out now, and I started looking through them. And then I started thinking about sauna. And a lot of my impressions were from her. She was very proud of the sauna. It was endemic with us, you know, from her. She had a lot of sauna stories too, because she was a storyteller as well. She wrote an article for the American Uutiset out of Florida. She was a translator, and she loved to talk. And I went back in my mind and was really appreciative of her more now than ever at my age.
Barbara, you probably don't realize, but one time she met some visitors from Finland, met them on the street somewhere, and ended up bringing them here for sauna to our house.
Did she? She translated for, remember Mullarit?
Yes.
Mullarit was that rock group from Karelia, Russia,
Yes.
and Finland. Arto, you know, from Juonso, Finland, and Karelia.
No,
and
from Petroskoy, yes.
Yes, and that was in she was they sent her some Finnish songs to be translated into English for their CD that they were making. And they sent it to other people, but they chose the ones that she translated. And she was that was just before she died. And so I had to bring that CD for her. And
Barbara's
show her
mother was
dear name.
practicing sauna diplomacy.
So anyway,
Amanda and Dana, you didn't share a particular anecdote about sauna that has endeared you to sauna culture yet.
Well, no, I mean, I think I don't know if this is a particular anecdote, but I will say through all of this process of trying to talk to people about their stories, whether it's through the Sauna Week, Sauna Stories, or this larger documentary that we're working on. I think one thing that is interesting, and I think it's Jim, I think it sort of underlines your point about at least Finnish-Americans being very welcoming to anyone that's interested in their culture to sort of, you know, adopt them in. And I think sauna is sort of the heart of that, because while there is some hesitance initially, I think a lot of them are like, oh, why would you, if you're like, hey, can I talk to you about your sauna? They're like, well, why would you want to initially? But then once they do, they're like super welcoming, and they want to show you everything, and they want you to take a sauna with them. And then beyond that, like when people, we've had people from all over, literally, that we don't know, that contact somehow through my email, and they'll want to somehow tell us their sauna stories, or have their mom tell their sauna stories, and I'm like, well, I don't know how, because she's in New York, but so I mean, and then we even literally got sent a box of, or 2 boxes of photo slides from like sauna photos from the 70s in the Keweenaw. and that just came out of nowhere. Some guy wrote hand wrote a letter and then sent us these photo slides because he was like, I could think his wife had died and he was cleaning out his stuff. He's like, I don't think I'll be able to use these, but it sounds like you guys could more or less. And
Yeah.
we're in the process of working with the Finnish-American archives to digitize all those, and those will make it into our documentary. And because from what I've seen, like holding them up to a light, or my friend gave me like some slide magnifier. There's some really cool stuff that I don't know how many of these buildings exist today, but he sort of has documented where they are, and so I think that'll be just its own little journey to go on. So as you like sort of enter the space of like trying to tell these stories, I think then you get thrown in all these different directions. There's so many pathways. So I think that's why it's important to like start doing it, right?
Absolutely, and I can only assume that this webinar will also instigate more work to be done. The sauna behind me, when it was brought here a few years ago, I had a Finnish-American local contractor help me with it and to kind of restore it. And the young guys who were working on it, they were probably in their mid-30s, totally Finnish ancestry. And I started to realize that even though they're living here in the Copper Country, and even though they were 100% Finnish, and even though they have saunas, and in both cases, they had large families, so the sauna was heated every night as a way of being able to bathe all the kids. They didn't understand the old traditions. So I had to go to some of the things I wanted. I had to go actually on the internet and find photos, and I'd print them and bring them down and show them. And one photo showed how I wanted the ceiling to be, and it was a very old photo, and there were some very old men sitting on the sauna bench, kind of slouched over, and then standing there was a fully dressed woman, long, old-fashioned dress, her hair up. And I said, well, do you know why she's there? And they said, no, we don't know. I said, she's there to bathe them. Oh, no. They wouldn't have any part of that. And the next morning they came back, and the one man said, you know, my wife's grandfather came over last night, and I asked him about this. And he said, well, of course, that women used to come in and bathe people. You know, sometimes it was even the old maids on the farm who had to go in and bathe the men. And so I was kind of thrilled that one thing had instigated a conversation in their home. And he said, okay, over there, there was a small piece of deer antler, and he had put it on the wall like a hook. And he said, I put that there for the cow horns. And I said, oh, cow horns, what do you know about cow horns? And he explained how Grandpa had told him all about cupping, the cupping tradition. And I thought this was something that was well worth it, because it made me realize that even though people living here, they're not necessarily picking up all the tradition, and they're not necessarily passing the information on. So we need these conversations. We need the sauna book. We need the sauna videos. We need to have these conversations so that all this information gets passed on. And I had similarly, I had a young man here a few days ago to clean my roofs because we have so much snow. And he had been here a few years ago. And when he came, he said, my father said, you have a very nice sauna. Could I see it? And so I showed it to him, and he worked all day on the roofs. And at the end, he said, I'll do your garage roof yet. And I said, I'll come back tomorrow. It's getting dark. No, I'll do it. And I said, well, it's too bad I hadn't heated the sauna. And he said, oh, that'd be great. Thank you. So to this day, I don't know if he didn't hear me correctly or if he just played me, but I heated the sauna. And again, this young man was finding out he had all these questions. So he came last week, and he came prepared. He had a sauna bag with him, assuming I would also heat the sauna again, which I did. So these are all opportunities. And I'm getting hints that we're getting close to the end of time. So Haley, you haven't had a whole lot of airtime. Is there more you'd like to tell us?
No, I've been really enjoying listening to everybody. But one thing I was going to say with Amanda and Daena's project, that kind of going back to something they were talking about earlier, and even what Jim just kind of touched on, is it's interesting in the oral tradition project that they're working on. It's almost like in some of the interviews that you've had in the pieces that I've seen, it's like people are almost coming to their realization of their cultural heritage, like in the middle of the interview.
Oh,
And
God,
so
yeah.
those, you can kind of see those like those realizations being made almost real time, which is so cool. And I feel like so excited because when I've gone to all these saunas, I've been able to talk to people, but I'm not doing the project in the same way as the Mäkeläs are. And so for that to be able to visualize like in a video format, I think is super important. And I don't know, I'm sure you guys probably know which, like a couple of interviews I'm talking
No,
about.
I mean, Haley, you're so right. I mean, I can even reflect on our interview with Barbara several years ago during Sauna Stories, and she said something so striking to me at the time, because, you know, when we do these interviews, we very much lean into like the spirituality and like your memories and this sort of magic holistic moment. And she sort of said, Barbara, I don't know if you remember, like you sort of said like, well, you know, like it's a way to get clean. It's like basically no more interesting than somebody's bathroom, you know. You know, you gave us such a wonderfully frank response that it grounded us so much in that moment. But I think it's so important to know prospectively that sauna is a spiritual place for folks, and it's a very practical place. And so I think, you know, when we, at least for us, I'm only speaking for Daena and myself, but one thing that we feel very strongly about, and not just sauna, but in so much of our other work, is like drawing attention to something and allowing it to be a gateway, right? So it may not be perfect and it may not be the way you grew up doing it or the way you think it should be done, but we feel, in particular with sauna, that it is so important for people to experience it in any way that they can, because the goal, right, is not just body cleanliness, but spiritual, mental cleanliness, and coming together as a community, right? Like coming together as a couple, as friends, as our daughter started to do it, you know? So it's like, sure, we can look at people and even, you know, places in the queue and all that may be doing it one way or another way that we think is not right or great or bad or whatever. But, you know, just getting people to try it and appreciate it. And then maybe we start getting them into the like, okay, now you need to take a wood-fired one. Don't bring your cell phone in, you know, like all these like other practices, right? So,
Well, I think the other thing is that both Haley and Amanda, when you go to and do this, and Daena as well, when you're doing this work, you help people validate that it has value. I mean, you're telling them something that they never assumed before, that there's value in the stories and in the
and these practices are so ingrained into certain families and cultures, and that it's like, just like Haley said, it's like you see these people have this moment where they're like, oh wow, I never really realized that this was such an important memory to me, because you ask them and they're like, God, why would you want to know about that? Like, that's just me soaping up and taking a shower. But then you start to uncover like, oh, they had a very special conversation, or, you know, they had a one last sauna with somebody. So
Yeah, you're calling attention to some of these details that they've been seeing for a really long time that they're not necessarily like recognizing as special.
Well, I mean,
you
and
know?
even with your photos, Haley, like the sauna is such a, you know, just like a building maybe in someone's yard. Like they don't think of it as like beautiful, but it's allowing, you know, using art and sauna as a way for even the owner to be like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. Like this is something special and important, you know?
Yeah. I should also mention too that both of our projects, the Mäkeläs and I both were able to get Finlandia Foundation grants. And that has really been helpful with getting for me to be able to compensate some of the writers that I'm working with. So that has been helpful. Thank you, FFN.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes.
Yes, another
keep the lights on in our house.
Another memory that I would like to share is my grandfather on my mother's side. The story of him, they had a bigger sauna, and my cousin Raymond Mackey was one of the older cousins, and he related how when Grandpa took a sauna, he'd have Grandpa had his brother, whatever, his friends, old men, in the sauna. There was a group of them, and they took these young boys in the sauna with them to whisk them with the vista, the cedar bow. They use cedar bows. And so Raymond was fine, he was young, and those men don't realize that children have ears and that they can hear what they're talking about. And so Raymond has been gone for years, and of course Grandpa died in the late 40s, but I'm picturing that scene of those old men in the sauna and having those young boys with them, and beating them with the cedar boughs, but listening to the old men talk and what their stories were. I'm sorry that Raymond is gone. I would love to hear what the stories were.
We're sorry that Raymond didn't have a tape recorder with him.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the things you learn in sauna. Sauna is culture, right? Hearing the reflections of all of you and the way you connect to the sauna and the Finnish culture in the area in different ways, I think is fascinating, and it's touching. And for anyone who hasn't been to the area, I encourage you to go. I mean, you'll learn a lot about the Finnish-American heritage up there. In Copper Country. It's unlike anything else. It's a sauna belt for a reason, and it's the buckle for an even better reason. That's sort of the hub. Thank you all for being here. This has been a fascinating conversation. I think there's lots of conversation in the chat about a full-blown Netflix documentary. It was one of them about sauna in the US. So I think there's tons of energy there. We thank you for being here today with us.